Alright, so we've had our crazy kitty version of Snow White. Now we have the really dark adult version of Snow White, or at least adult-ish. In any case, I was looking forward to this movie, so let's review it. Snow White and the Huntsman. Alright, so Snow White and the Huntsman is the story of Snow White, the second one this year. And it's a very different tone than Mirror Mirror. This is the Snow White movie that someone like me can really sink my teeth into, you know? I mean, from the trailer you can tell, you're like, it almost looks like Snow White meets Pan's Labyrinth. And in some parts of the movie, you're like, this is Snow White meets Pan's Labyrinth. There's some scenes where she these spores hit her face. She's tripping balls. There's trolls and trees that are coming to life. Shit's trying to kill her. I was like, I played this in Diablo 3 just today. This happened. I feel you, Snow White. It's like you're on hardcore mode. Don't die. Don't die. Alright, so by now we know the basic story of Snow White. You know, you got the evil queen and then Snow White, and Snow White's locked in a tower, and then Snow White escapes, and the evil queen just causes death and decay throughout the kingdom. And Snow White needs to defeat her for the sake of puppies and Christmas and everything good. Ooh, gotta be peace. Can I say Christmas anymore? Is it holidays now? Christmas, whatever. And as someone who was looking forward to this movie, I can say I actually dug this movie. The evil queen is evil, and there's murder and really gross, dark spells. Like some spells she casts, you know, and she's like crawling out of tarish blood. You're like, that's a bad spell. That's not a spell I want to be a part of. First of all, let's talk about Charlize Theron as the evil queen. She was hot as hell and evil as hell. She is really bad in this movie. That's one thing you gather. You're like, that is one evil woman. And I like the relevance that the queen actually had. You know, usually in movies like this, it's like, oh, a big evil person. They're doing evil things because they're evil. But there are a couple parts where you're like, you were a person at one time. And it wasn't one of those forced moments to be like, oh, here, we're gonna give humanity to the villain, huh? That's officially what they do when they throw forced things in movies, huh? No, there were a couple moments where you were like, you were a human being. Now you're just so bad. Sometimes she kind of annoys you in the sense that she seems like just some chick with a grudge. Like a grudge against dudes, you know? She's like, if I were young, you'd break my heart. And you're like, let me guess, someone broke your heart? Is that why you're killing everything in the world? Are you like the she Anakin? Well, looking past that, she does a really good job at just showing that she is evil incarnate. She's like Satan, but a chick. Congratulations to my ex-girlfriends for being a character in a movie. But if there's one thing that does a really good job at carrying a movie, it's a good villain. She did a good job as a really good and evil villain. Next, we got Kristen Stewart as Snow White. All right, you know me and Kristen Stewart. I can't stand her. I don't know why, it's just that same performance she gives in everything, you know? She's always like, I talk like this, like I'm really damaged, and I barely even move my lips when I do it. However, I felt it worked in this movie because she would have a lot of damage in her. She's seen her father die. She's been locked in a tower dungeon all her life. Yeah, I'd probably be a little damaged too. I'm not saying the woman has range. I'm saying that her typecast worked for this movie. You really felt like Snow White and the evil queen were opposites. They were polar opposites of each other. That Batman Joker feeling, you know, like the two are connected and they have to fight. It's fate. And then we have Chris Hemsworth as the Huntsman. I liked him as the Huntsman, of course. You knew from the trailer, you knew from the moment you found out Chris Hemsworth was the Huntsman, you were like, that's perfect. You had no gripes about it. Any gripes you might have had about this movie had nothing to do with Chris Hemsworth. And of course, he was good as the Huntsman. My only gripe is that he didn't steal the show. I like it when characters like this, you know, the Brigand, the Han Solo in medieval times steal the show. In the end, he wasn't the one who stole the show. I felt it was Charlize Hotness as the evil queen. Hotness who gets older throughout the movie. It's really cool how she gets older throughout the movie because she's decaying. I'll say this, in the end of the movie, and I almost want to say spoiler alert, but I don't think it's a spoiler because you know that Snow White's gonna have to face the evil queen at the end. But when she does, it was almost like, dude, this is Castlevania. It's like the she Castlevania. Really, I felt like Kristen Stewart was the she Belmont going up against the evil hot queen who's like she Dracula. Kristen Stewart should be glad that she didn't have to go up against Death because he's always the biggest dick boss in every Castlevania game. He's always the hardest. I hate it. Another thing I like is that Snow White is like the she Messiah. And you always got that in all the Snow White tales. They're always like, oh, she's the fairest of them all. She's gonna bring peace to the land. But you never really got that she's the one. She's Neo. She's like the Neo of the Snow White world. And I really like that this movie illustrated that. My gripes are few, but they are in it. One of them is that Kristen Stewart gets attached to these characters throughout the movie. And then of course the bad guys are on their trail and this town gets burned down. It's supposed to be this big tragic thing, but you're like, well, I mean, it's tragic for her, but you weren't with these characters long enough to really care. I felt like you were supposed to be, but you just weren't. In the end, Snow White and the Huntsman is a really cool movie, a cool take on Snow White. I liked the characters. Even Kristen Stewart's really stoic, overly damaged persona worked for this movie. I will say I would buy this movie on Blu-ray. If you're overly hyped for this movie, which a lot of people are, you might be like, oh, this movie was totally overhyped. Doesn't mean the movie's bad, it's just that you hyped yourself up a little too much. But a good movie, I'd recommend it to people. Alright, so what's your favorite dark fairy tale? You know, a lot of fairy tales out there, but what's the one where you're like, yeah, That's just not, the kids shouldn't hear that. Movie, fable, fantasy, whatever, doesn't matter, I don't care. Comment below, let me know. As long as it's near and dear to your heart as a fairy tale, it's all good to me, man. And as always, if you like what you've seen here and you want to see more, click right here to see more.